Hey all. Well, I'm back. Hope everyone is well. I know it's been a while since my last video, but I've been busy, as I'm sure you have too. Been shooting a lot of porn. You know, working hard every day, as they say in the biz. Hopefully you can see some of my various titles. Mighty Joe Hung, Honey I Made the Kids, Sit on my Facebook, Magnum GI, Bangathon Volume 124, Smokey and the Backdoor Bandit, Dawn of the Dead, The Usual Suspects, Pornstar at gmail.com all over your face, and Sex Toy Story, Woody's Woody. I'm, of course, available for, bookings, bachelorette parties, office parties, bat mitzvahs, weight loss seminars. Okay, enough of the amateur improv hour. Let's get to some analysis, shall we? So regarding the case, to be honest, there was never any developments that came about that, in my opinion, really had a chance to alter the tide in this court game, at least since the last time I did a video. That hasn't happened until now. I believe that this motion has major potential to really get this lock opened, but as always, if my theory is correct, the deep state of Wisconsin will stop at nothing to keep their nefarious ways hidden. So if Kathleen Zellner is somehow unsuccessful in her newfound motion to free Stephen Avery, it honestly wouldn't surprise me. But there is a way around this court game that I'll illustrate at the end of the video. It's a vector that's so simple and it's already baked into the cake, yet we forget it's there. So let's begin. Let's for once ignore how the defense could have missed this, since much of the sleuthing done over the past couple of years has focused on Tweedledee and Tweedledumbass. But how on God's green Dantooine did the prosecution miss the fact that Bobby Dassey was not only a bad witness with all of these anomalies found in his computer, but also missed that he might be a potential suspect? I mean, in fact, he was the only one with MMO, means motive and opportunity, because Stephen and Brendan actually didn't have much of a motive, which then begs the other question that, as far as I know, no one has bothered to bring up, which is, of course, why all mofos just love to listen to me, aside from this sexy pseudo-Barry White voice modulation I got going. But no one bothered to bring up the glaring fact that if Bobby, with all that stuff on his computer, didn't have MMO, or more to the point, just simply motive alone to be considered for the Denny rule, how come Brendan was considered to have motive for the actual crime? If Brendan's so-called motive was blind, lustful rage, to which even on-scene at the time reporter and current southeastern Wisconsin conservative radio talk show host Dan O'Donnell believes, with his Rebutting a Murderer podcast, that blind, lustful rage of this mentally challenged teenage boy was motive enough for Brendan to rape, kill, and mutilate Teresa Halbach, yet Bobby, the older Hunter brother, and still at the time teenage boy as well, somehow did not qualify to be a potential third-party suspect under the Denny rule, even though Bobby, with hunting alone versus Brendan's aversion to hunting, somehow was not considered to be a person with potential for motive, much less flat-out motive? Brendan Red kissed the girls, even though he probably actually never did kiss a girl, yet Bobby has Smack My Bitch Up porn on his computer. And not Prodigy Smack My Bitch Up, mind you, but Charles Manson Smack My Bitch Up porn on his computer, yet he gets a complete pass? Now, I'm surprised law enforcement didn't just come to the conclusion that Teresa Halbach raped and murdered herself. Self-loathing, you know. Well, now we find out that Bobby has all the hallmarks, not to mention scratch marks on his back, of not only motive, but full-on MMO, means motive and opportunity for prosecutors to look at and bring forth a charge for Bobby, yet this was not only tossed aside, but not even considered? Asterisk, slash forehead, asterisk. I do want to address the scratches for a second. Assuming they were made by human fingernails, ladies, believe it or not, I've had my fair share of back scratches in my days. Well, to be honest, a few. But that's only because women, well, more to the point, people, are vastly different in their coital behaviors. Some are loud, some breathe heavy, some do a great impersonation of a fallen tree log, and some scratch backs, some lightly, and some leave serious marks. Man, this one time, I can't really get into it, but the funny thing about it was that her God-given last name was a word that's synonymous with pain. Story for another time. But for mine, they were given to me when I was doing my quote-unquote job, so to speak. But more to the point, they were given to me when I was doing my job well. Ladies, and perhaps you can help me clarify this point, or if I'm totally off base, correct me on it, but how many women out there scratch the backs of a man who's assaulting them? None? Well, that'd be my guess, because back scratches, at least from my experience, not like I have experience on the other side of this, mind you, but back scratches are a reaction to a pleasurable experience. Because if a man is assaulting you, wouldn't you be scratching his face, his eyes, his chest and shoulders? I mean, assuming that Bobby did indeed assault and or murder Teresa Halbach, wouldn't said scratches be on those body parts and blatantly visible to others that Bobby came in contact with hours and days after the supposed assault? Assuming that Bobby did assault Teresa Halbach and the scratches were indeed on his back from her, wouldn't that indicate a consensual encounter? Ooh, the plot thickens. Which, if there was some meat harpoon at Tuna Lagoon, that apparently wasn't the only thing that was thickening. Wah, wah. Oh my God. Oh, never mind. We're not talking about Down syndrome children at the border. We're good. Even so, I could just simply pretend I'm Juan Williams and chalk it up to a bad choice of words. Their rules, not mine. Open wide, zipper sandwich, bite down, you whiny little bitches. Anyway, now that we're in La La Land, there are people who are into this whole thing being a satanic ritual killing since it was on Halloween, and supposedly the people who are into this drug and human and child trafficking stuff are into the cult crap. Well, assuming that Bobby did have sex with Teresa Halbach and she scratched his back, evidence would certainly lead to something consensual, which certainly would be in line with these supposed orgies and such that happen at these supposed rituals, in which case that would certainly make more sense given the evidence of back scratches versus normal defensive wounds that a man would suffer while assaulting a female. Granted, is that satanic ritual stuff more plausible than other scenarios that may have happened given the fact that Bobby had back scratches? No. And honestly, it could have been his Labrador puppy, as he claimed. I mean, he could have been getting his weenie wet from some other chick. I mean, hell, he could have gone to Smith's Petting Zoo and raped the spider monkeys for all we know. But thinking out loud here and following the deductive reasoning method of Sherlock Holmes, leaving no stone unturned and accepting all possibilities versus mere probabilities, I'm not going to discount anything. And once again, I like to bring up things that no one else does. And who knows? I mean, Robert Durst was caught 30 years after the fact after being acquitted because he misspelled Beverly in Beverly Hills on an envelope address that he wrote. So who knows? Maybe there's a whole group of elite Satanists running the world. Or maybe Bobby Dassey's just one sick bastard. Who knows, but scratches need to be analyzed as such. Here's something else no one has mentioned, at least to my knowledge. Bobby supposedly not only had porn on his PC that contained underage girls, but was also trying to chat up underage girls, probably for hookups. Bobby was trending underage Tinder before Tinder was trending. Say that 5 times fast. Why has he not only not been charged, but he's also not been prosecuted for this? Wouldn't this also lead to motive for not only being a suspect, but for also allowing his name to be brought into the trial for the Denny ruling? In one of my videos, I talked about the guy I knew who murdered 2 people and went through the full tilt boogie. It's been so long that I can't really remember how much I told about that story, but one of the people he killed was a family member through long-term dating. The guy that was killed was in his early 20s and had been arrested for being in a chat room and talking to / attempting to meet up with a 14-year-old girl in a public park that was actually a cop. Surprisingly, that wasn't the reason he was killed. In fact, the night he was killed, the murderer was actually trying to help him find a place to stay because due to his newfound sex offender status, the soon-to-be murderee was having trouble to find a place that allowed pervs to live there. And then, Mama obviously said something dude didn't like, and whack. All I can say about that, ladies, is when you become a mother-in-law, sometimes you can be a real bitch. Just don't become a mother-in-law to a psychotic killer, then be a bitch. Helpful hint. Anyway, point of the story is, all that guy did was try to hook up with a girl online, and he got sex offender status. Yet Bobby Dassey, with pics and chats and porn, is still walking around free, still having the title of star witness for Ken Cratcher Pants and the Alibi Sandwich Man. Welcome to the Man-at-the-Walk family restaurant. Our specials tonight are Ryan Hilligas salad, empty head of lettuce with very little dressing. We have the Bobby Dassey sandwich, a lot of bologna, hard to swallow, but apparently a lot of stupid people are buying it. And for our drink special, we have Ken Crass beer. Oh, wait, I'd better check. I thought we had a case, but now I'm not so sure. I'm here all week. Try the VO. So Bobby is a child porn perv, and he's still walking the streets. Not to mention, they got their computer back. There are people in Wisconsin who used a gun to legally defend themselves in their own home. And even though the law states that law enforcement has to give the citizen their gun back, they still don't have their guns, and the case is still tied up in court. Between these events and also with what's going on with Paul Manafort and Hillary Clinton's aide, Awan, if Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey aren't set free after all this, I'm going to start a petition to change the Pledge of Allegiance from liberty and justice for all to liberty and justice for some. Because this is where this deep state stuff goes. Yet through all this, Strang and Buting, the supposed Ferris Bueller, you're my hero, dynamic duo of this whole clown car cavalcade, have now signed affidavits saying that the CD or the 7 DVDs and CDs and thousands of pages and images and such was not available to them at the time of trial. How did these quote-unquote expert defense attorneys miss this CD and all its accompanying materials? Granted, this transaction of information provided by Calumet Rocketman Ken Kratz miraculously happened mere days before they decided to bring Brendan in for his fateful interview. Surprise, surprise. Which is why when Dean Strang responds to Part R of Kratz's stipulation lists that, although they won't stipulate to Kratz's request on Teresa Halbach's computer, quote, Brendan's computer is not relevant unless he is a witness, keyword here, or his statements are offered, end quote. And for Stephen's computer, quote, we will stipulate, and this is Dean Strang's response, quote, we will stipulate that nothing of evidentiary value was found on Stephen Avery's computer when the hard drives were analyzed by law enforcement, end quote. So did they not change their minds on Brendan's computer, which is actually Bobby's computer, when Brendan blabbed his so-called confession, or did they just conveniently forget about it when their client was now damned to life in prison, only for them to sign affidavits claiming that they never received any information about the Dassey computer like naive little rookie law clerks? No attorney, much less high-priced expert attorneys, would have accepted the prosecutor's letter which stated, quote, found nothing of evidentiary value, end quote, on that computer, especially after a confession like Brendan's. That's like on Orange is the New Black when the governor's assistant tells the negotiator gals, we'll do our best to meet your needs. I mean, what political double talk? If someone told me that Scarlett Johansson was made of sugar, spice, and everything nice, yet tasted like vinegar and smelled like tuna, I'm still going to go out on a limb and check for myself. Well, more like go in between her limbs, but still, now we're just debating semantics. Point is, she'd get it, hands down, in the mouth, then I'd bend her over, buy her a small island, the usual. But back to Jerome Butthurt and Dean G. Strang, aside from all the other stuff that has been uncovered about these two being heavily involved in Wisconsin politics, these two conveniently not viewing the computer data from the cells alone would give anyone pause as to having an inkling that these two burden-earning heartthrob attorneys are instead a couple of cockthrob insiders. Point blank, these guys were in on this. This goes to proving the already obvious point I've made numerous times before, and that is, this was more of a set-up than a cover-up. And if I'm wrong, I'll dress up in a ballerina tutu and apologize on live television, while Ashton Birdie spanks me with a cricket paddle. Okay, sometimes I hope I'm wrong. Is that so wrong? That aside, I've said it once and I'll say it again. If it weren't for the simple fact that these two ladies, who decided to come to the Midwest to chase a curious headline and spent a decade relentlessly making sure that this information got out, none of this would have ever been discovered. Like Robert Durst, just like so many other things in this world that without a simple twist of fate would have never happened. This is the Wisconsin equivalent to Trump's victory. Regardless of whether you like Monsieur Oompa Loompa or not, this is merely a statement of fact, which I'll soon tie together. Back to the whole Bobby thing. Now, I'm not making an excuse because I personally think Bobby had a lot to do with this. But in observing the world for what it really is, you have to realize that a teenage, yet adult teenage boy with a job and access to his own credit card along with his own personal access to the newly invented, well, new at the time, newly invented internet, and granted, he was living in the boonies using a dial-up modem. And for those of us who remember trying to actually stream a video or get to the point where you can channel your inner booger from Revenge of the Nerds with a yawping, we've got Bush, with dial-up, damn near impossible. But still, a 19-year-old kid with internet and a credit card looking up fisting, Mexican donkey shows, Japanese tentacle porn, German chicken doinking, furries, poop-eating women being tied up and spanked, golden showers, every other imaginable sexual act of human debauchery. It's nothing unexpected. especially again in the new world of the internet in 2005. It's nothing surprising. Not nearly as surprising as the fact that, according to the motion, on Kratz's letter, Part M, it states that around October 10th, both Stephen and Barb bought a set of handcuffs and leg irons. Did Barb and Scotty use these? Did Bobby use these? Did he use these on Teresa Halbach? Did Brendan see Bobby do this stuff to Teresa in Scott's trailer that mysteriously was never searched and then hauled off the property, just as good old Lieutenant Lank just happened to be looking to swap a trailer a few days after? But back to the computer. However, the fact that he had violent porn depicting female rape, mutilation, etc., which is exactly what happened to Teresa Halbach, supposedly, should have at least raised the eyebrows of law enforcement and prosecutors, and should have at least been enough not only to view Bobby as a potential suspect, but for the judge to allow Dean Strang and Jerome Buting to introduce him as a third-party Denny suspect for the trial. As for Teresa Halbach's remains, I say supposedly because remember, there is actually no concrete proof that she's dead. All you have are bones, female, approximately the same height, same age, which is where the Carmen Boatwell theory comes into play. The single tooth, which, as you remember, was broken and had to be put together by the dentist like Humpty Dumpty. And then you had the Prang Gobots Admiral Nelson DNA test that at best shows that the bones belong to a female hominid. There's no real proof that she's dead. Another interesting fact that I learned recently is that when the Manitowoc County coroner, the same coroner that was not allowed onto the Avery salvage yard crime scene, was not only not allowed to do the autopsy of Teresa Halbach, but there was another autopsy that she was not allowed to do. She did not do the autopsy of Carmen Boatwell, the young woman whose mother confided that Carmen was a pothead but never did any hard drugs, yet overdosed on methadone of all things, which is mainly controlled by nonprofits and treatment houses, etc., which is also easily obtainable and deliverable by law enforcement. She overdosed on November 3rd, coincidentally the same day that Teresa Halbach is finally reported missing. Guess who Carmen Boatwell's autopsy was done by? Not the next door and taking the case Calumet County coroner, or the nearby corrupt-ass Green Bay Packer Country Brown County coroner, not the Winnebago County coroner or the Fond du Lac County coroner. No, the person who did the autopsy was none other than the Waukesha County coroner, a county 3 counties away from Manitowoc and Calumet. You know, Waukesha, where the current Wisconsin Attorney General Brad Schimmel was the district attorney for 2+ decades, where the current DA, Sue Opper, the DA in one of the Wisconsin WOW counties, doesn't cooperate with federal authorities regarding illegal immigrant criminals and hides her county's activities in a sea of secrecy. And for those of you who don't know what the WOW counties are, the WOW counties are Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington counties. These are the Wisconsin conservative stronghold counties, which are the big 3 conservative counties that put conservative statewide politicians like Brad Schimmel into their seats. Conservative voters who demand that immigration laws are followed, and not only that, immigration laws that are being pushed by President Trump. Policies that conservative politicians should not only be following, but joyfully following, and even trying to push them further. Yet Waukesha County will not cooperate with the feds and with ICE when it comes to arresting, detaining, and transferring illegal immigrant criminals to federal authorities. Do you realize what I'm saying here? This is like Billy Graham preaching his sermon on a Sunday to thousands of his devout Christian goody-two-shoes followers who give generously to the upstanding example of clean living that Billy Graham would be, and then him going in the back to do blow off of hookers' asses and participating in orgies that everyone in the media knows about yet won't cover because otherwise the good parishioners out front wouldn't break out their wallets to shell out their 10% tithings. Granted, these guys are still better than the alternative and their opponents, which would really, honestly, do the exact same thing, but with higher taxes. But this is what has been and is going on in this supposed bastion of political purity county. If you're asking why the most conservative county in the state, which is being run by supposed conservative politicians who, even though they should be happily complying with not only federal immigration policies, but also enforcing the laws to keep their conservative constituents happy, safe, and voting for them, if you're asking why both the former and current Waukesha DAs won't work with federal authorities to keep illegal immigrant criminals off the streets, you'd be wondering a very valid question. Why would they do that? Could it be that the illegal immigrant criminals that they keep letting go are the same criminals involved in the drug and human trafficking trade that politicians control? The same politicians and the same type of trade that goes on all over the state of Wisconsin and country as well? Remember when I said that I was feet away from Wisconsin Attorney General Brad Schimel when he stated that Milwaukee's the #1 hub for human trafficking in the U.S.? I don't know if that's still true, but it certainly was back then. Well, now you probably have a pretty good clue as to why this goes on in the population hub of the state of Wisconsin, making it the little northern brother of Chicago. It's a great racket, because if the illegal criminals don't play ball with the way the politicians, law enforcement, and prosecutors want them to, they go bye-bye, either to actual prison or via deportation. I've got no reason to believe that they're buried in shallow graves somewhere, or like a certain female photographer we all know, cremated in a funeral home crematorium owned by one of the members of this cartel. But it certainly wouldn't surprise me either. Waukesha County is directly west of Milwaukee County, and Milwaukee County has the largest population in the state of Wisconsin. Milwaukee is so poorly run, the stories I could tell you, you'd think I'm making them up. And I'm posting this shortly after Independence Day to give you, the listener, the time frame of when this was posted. There's a viral video going around nationally and probably globally, which shows two rather sturdy, shall we say, Wisconsin thin white women in a kitchen cooking food at a local Milwaukee family restaurant chain called George Webb's. A dreadlocked black male enters the back and straight up Mama Fratelli, I'll show you a tremor, cold cocks the woman with the spatula that's nearest to him. As she retreats to the back, the man starts to follow her until the other lady pulls out a gun and straight up, break yourself, fool, finally gets the man to leave. As of this recording, I don't know the man's motivation. I don't know whether the female is somebody that he knew. I don't even know if the guy was caught. What I can tell you, and I'm telling you this because you need to know how bad things are, so you can believe me when I say that there are high-level people who are soft on the criminal element for reasons that could certainly be chalked up to being in cahoots with them. I can tell you that this guy had a rather extensive rap sheet, and yet he was out on the street. Here's another example of how bad it is in Milwaukee. There is a 17-year-old male named Deontay Long who plays basketball for Washington High School, who was caught doing 3 armed robberies and not only is not in jail, not only was he not expelled, he was allowed to play in the boys' state basketball tournament for Wisconsin athletics. You have countless scenarios where felons are caught with guns in a stolen car dealing drugs and they're let off on signature bond. This is why that man was able to clock that cook, because he was out on the streets. Now that he's famous, or rather infamous to quote the Three Amigos, he may see punishment for this assault, but I'm not going to hold my breath with these soft-on-crime Milwaukee judges that keep getting elected mainly because they run unopposed. Milwaukee, for years, up until recently when Chief Ed Flynn finally decided to retire, mere days after his 10-year anniversary, the same Ed Flynn from the D.C. area in Virginia where the D.C. sniper was, which coincidentally is also the area with the highest rate of child disappearances in the country, Chief Flynn had a no-chase policy in the city of Milwaukee. That meant that unless the car itself was involved in, or they somehow knew that the driver of the car was involved in, not wanted for a warrant, but was involved in, as in within the last few hours, was involved in a felony crime, the police were not allowed to pursue a car chase if the driver decided to romp on the gas when the cherries and berries lit up. This allowed felons with guns in stolen cars that were running a moving drug house operation to flee scot-free when a pursuit could have had a good chance of hauling them in. Then, even if they were caught, they'd get off with probation on a signature bond or a cash bond low enough that most drug dealers could pay for with cash. Why on earth would a police chief do this? Either he's a bleeding heart moron who really believes his policy works, he's a puppet for the politicians who want to keep it real, or he's getting kickbacks from this somehow. I can tell you which one I believe went down, especially when all you have to do is take the same freeway that runs through Chicago and up through Milwaukee, north to Manitowoc, and to Green Bay. So when people around the country listening to this say to themselves, oh, well, they wouldn't simply let violent criminals and illegal immigrant criminals out on signature bond while sticking it to Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey, I can confidently tell those people who are thinking that where it is and how long to suck. Better check your gag reflexes, because I don't own a Corvette and I don't make bets I can't win. Back to Waukesha County where Carmen Boatwell's autopsy was performed. the same crooked Waukesha County that does a 180 on its constituents by doing the exact opposite of what the constituents want by letting not only criminals, but illegal drug and human traffickers run loose. The same Waukesha County that produced the current Attorney General, who's not only buddies with the original Avery trial prosecutor Ken Kratz, but the same AG who is spearheading the current fight against the Avery defense. This same county who also had a coroner that did the autopsy of the girl that supposedly overdosed on methadone the exact same day that Teresa Halbach is reported missing. What a coincidence. Because if I had to use a body double to fake Teresa's death, that's exactly what I'd do. Take a woman who looked exactly like Teresa with the same build and even who was a distant relative, have her OD, have the cops involved in Stephen's cover-up take care of the body and the paperwork, get the body to Waukesha, and wrap it in a nice little package that can only be identified by circumstantial means. Then make sure she's cremated so all the evidence matches and nothing can be revisited. Yet with just enough DNA to fool a jury, then surprisingly the next election cycle had the death penalty on the ballot for statewide referendum, which stated in that referendum that the death penalty would apply to those proven guilty by DNA evidence. I'll say it again. If it weren't for those two ladies, this cabal would have pulled off the perfect crime and cover-up. I'd like to thank my special friend, Nordeligne Derhay, for that little morsel of information. Just today, in the local southeastern Wisconsin news in Waukesha County, and remember, Waukesha County is one of the WOW counties, super conservative, a judge by the name of Tom Wolfgram signed the Walker recall petition years ago when that was in circulation when the Democrats were trying to oust Governor Walker and force a recall election. Whatever, if he wants to sign, that's his right to do so. He really shouldn't, being a judge, and judges are supposed to be nonpartisan, but still, it's his right to do so. However, instead of manning up and telling his conservative constituents that he's a bleeding heart, he instead decided to try to make up some excuse as to why he signed the recall petition because he didn't want to lose his cushy judgeship where he holds people's lives and fates in his hands. Joe Voiland ran against him and beat him. Ever since day one, Voiland has had one hell of a time dealing with the workers there, and the new judge was accused of doing wrongdoings by the old guard workers who were used to working with and who were buddies with old Judge Wolfgram. There was an investigation done by a special investigator assigned by Judge Doro who investigated it, and what essentially came out was, nothing to see here, folks. Not once was any one of the workers who claimed that Voiland did wrongdoings asked if they supported Judge Wolfgram in the election. Secrecy, even in adversaries. I mean, hey, we're all on the same team here, right? Sound familiar? If not, it will soon. I'm going to tell you something that not many people know. And this little bit of information here is really when I decided to make this video, because this is about as scary as it gets. Because if this is happening with the deep state being called out and exposed for what it is by viewers like you and politicians like President Trump, imagine what things would be like if they weren't being called out. There's a movement led by a man by the name of Randy Koshnick. Randy Koshnick was a judge in Jefferson County for years. Jefferson County is west of Waukesha County and in between Waukesha County and Dane County. Dane County being where the city of Madison, the capital of Wisconsin, is located. Randy Koshnick is now the director of state courts for the state of Wisconsin, i.e. he's basically the manager of the state courts from the Wisconsin Supreme Court on down. A local news personality had uncovered a very disturbing bit of information. While attempting to look up a court case in where? You guessed it, Waukesha County, as in, once again, one of the WOW counties, i.e., I'll state it again, one of the ultra-conservative yet let illegal immigrants who traffic drugs and humans free on signature bond and in doing so flat out refuse to contact the federal authorities, Waukesha County. While looking up a court case in Waukesha County, he was told by the director of state courts, Randy Koshnick, that in regards to the courts having to respond to a FOIA or Freedom of Information Act open records request, Randy responded, and I'm quoting from the article, quote, "The Wisconsin Supreme Court intends to decide whether the state court system is subject to open records law. The issue is currently under consideration by the court. Koshnick said there were no pending cases regarding this matter, but the issue has risen recently, so the court has determined that it is appropriate for the court to address it." End quote. Now, they say this is regarding email addresses, but email addresses can not only be easily ignored, and they're not only work emails versus personal emails, but are usually easily able to be figured out if you have an IQ higher than that of a person who would pee their pants in amazement at being witness to you rubbing two sticks together to create fire. First initial, last name, at whatevergovernmentbody.gov. Not that difficult. But even though it says it's regarding the email system, it miraculously would also pertain to all court records. But why would a state court system, without warning, without a pending case to bring concern to any court, much less the state court, much less the state Supreme Court, take such action regarding the release of information regarding cases? Could it have something to do with what is going down in the FBI and President Trump? Not directly, but look at what that whole Russiagate thing is all about. It is about the exact same thing I mentioned in episode 11. It's about the exact same thing regarding what happened to Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey. They are using their high-level power to make sure that whatever they're doing stays hidden. What happens at deep state stays in deep state, or more to the point, actually doesn't even exist. But even though we should be gravely concerned at what's going on in Washington, D.C., here in Wisconsin, with Stephen Avery's attorney, Kathleen Zellner, now throwing down the hammer on what almost certainly cannot be ignored by any court other than the one that's involved in this cabal, does it not raise one's eyebrows that the entire state of Wisconsin is looking at whether or not they have to obey FOIA requests? Does this not concern anyone else that an apparatus is now in motion by the courts to make sure that, without a major fight, backed by the Wisconsin Department of Justice and possibly the United States Department of Justice, the same one that's trying to derail a duly elected president, along with the Wisconsin court system, up to and possibly including the Wisconsin Supreme Court, that will realistically take years to resolve in said court system if fully implemented, that the people of Wisconsin may very well never be able to find out what's going on or what went on behind the scenes in not only the Stephen Avery Brendan Dassey case, but in connecting cases that may hint at, show, or prove that the very people who raised their right hands and swore an oath to serve and protect us were or are actually involved in crimes that are so numerous and go so high that the very pulling of a single thread that may unravel the tapestry of this blanket of corruption, which would be so vast and so unthinkable that the American people would scarcely grasp it and would struggle to believe it. I, for one, am certainly gravely concerned, especially if my theory is correct and these high-level people are actually running both sides of the law, and with the stroke of a pen will legally forbid the public to see what they're hiding in the hopes that we all go back to our Call of Duty and our Game of Thrones. This is House of Cards in real life. The show got canceled. I assure you this won't be. Isn't it about time you fought back? Think about how fragile our society is. Our money is paper. It works because you believe that this paper with Ben Franklin on it is worth more than the paper with George Washington on it. In 1929, the stock market crashed in one day and brought the Great Depression that lasted years. There's an old saying that says Rome wasn't built in a day, but it fell in one. Rome stood for a millennium. It held 2 million square miles of land from Scotland to Turkey, and it fell because due to its corruption and inability to govern so many from so far away, a gang of illiterate barbarians literally walked in, took what they wanted, and took over. What followed was another millennia known as the Dark Ages. I'm saying this because if you Google these events, you'll find out that almost every single one of these historically significant events can usually be tied to the actions of a few. Like I said in my prior video, in Wisconsin and 40 out of the 50 states, a few hundred people told millions that regardless of what they wanted, they could no longer smoke in indoor establishments. The few controlled the many. This is no different. But in this is where we should be really concerned. When Paul Revere rode through the streets yelling, "The British are coming," most people went back to bed. Very few took up arms. Very few stood on the bridge. Very few at Concord. Very few at Lexington. Very few crossed the Delaware. Very few signed the Declaration of Independence. Yet when you try to convince someone that very few do things like this, very few could start wars, very few could attempt to frame a U.S. president for a crime that didn't exist, and that only a fraction of 1% of the population of all communist countries that have ever fallen to communism were actually members of the party, It takes very few people to make things happen, especially if those people have position, power, and ability to do so. Listen up, friends. This is how bad our deep state government has got. This is really why you should be concerned. It's not about a couple of guys who are sitting in prison, because this could be any of us, and we have to wonder what it is that they're hiding. Well, I think I've got a pretty good idea. If you don't wake up and put your blind hatred aside and start looking at what is really going on and how the very few seek to control you, the very many, without these few lucky respites, they very well could have succeeded, and they very well still may. Here's a hint. For those of you who don't get it, get off your dead ass. Pull your cock out of the Candy Crush, pull your face out of the book, pull the tweeter out of your twatter, take an hour out of your day once every 2 years, and look at who's running for public office. Find the people you never heard of, find out what you can about them. Ask tough questions. Ask on their Facebook page, their Twitter, via email. Force them to tell you what they intend to do, and if it's more of this deep state crap, spread the word about them and make them defend their position on why they want to turn you into servants. Does Brad Schimmel really think Stephen Avery's guilty? He said in his campaign that he was going to fight drug and human trafficking. Has he? How? Why don't we know that? And the sad part is, just like how in 2004, we had either John Kerry or George W. Bush to choose from, both men who happened to have been attendees of Yale and were members of Skull and Bones. What are the chances? Remember when I said secrecy even in adversaries? We were damned if we did or damned if we didn't. Well, guess what? This election year, if Brad Schimmel loses, Wisconsin will have Josh Kaul. Josh Kaul just happens to be the son of Peg Lautenschlager, the Attorney General who was not only presiding Attorney General during this whole Avery fiasco, but who was more than likely the mastermind, or at worst, the main facilitator of this miscarriage of justice and this cover-up. So once again, we're damned if we do or damned if we don't. I mean, I still hands down rather have Brad Schimmel in there for the single reason that maybe he's just a naive moron who simply does what his advisors and staff tell him to, and he's merely helping out his old band buddy Ken Kratz in this case against Avery. But if he is fighting Avery's defense, you can damn sure bet that Josh Kaul will continue on the warpath against Avery, considering that was mommy's golden case, and he hasn't even been pulled away from his mommy's dead teat yet. Not to mention that just like Jean Cachet, who died literally the day before Stephen Avery went to trial, Peg Lautenschlager dies just as Kathleen Zellner starts really yanking on those skeleton bones that have thus far been stuck in that closet. So wherever you are, doesn't matter where you are, it's going on in your state. Find out if there's some nobody, some honest-to-God, good, wet behind the ears guy or gal who's out there running for office to really make a difference. That kind of stuff doesn't cost any money. It doesn't cost you anything, because that is the only way we are ever going to turn this around. We got lucky with this crazy-ass orange fluffy-haired guy when he decided to run for president. Like him or hate him, the reality is he gave us not only a chance to stop this madness, but a chance to actually reverse it, to bring us back from the brink. So get off your dead ass, take your friends with you. Find good people who are running for office. Find good people to run for office. Find good people to help these people get into office. Hell, get out there and help these people run for office, and once they're there, keep their asses on track. You don't let your kids run around wherever the hell they want, do you? Why are you letting your elected officials do so when they wield the power that can literally control what you do? And if you don't believe me, go out in the town with a gun strapped to your hip and a lit cigarette in your mouth and see how long it takes before some guys in blue with the authority to put you in a cage on their say-so come to protect you from yourself. $20 or an hour out of your time per candidate goes a long way, because those few are the ones who write the laws to either help or hinder your liberties. Power is one hell of a thing. And even Darth Sidious reminded Anakin, remember back to your early teachings, all those who gain power are afraid to lose it. Only when we, the people, have the power can things be set right. I'd like to think that you're all going to open a new tab and write your congressman and tell them your concerns and find out how you can help them get elected and fight the good fight and pass just laws to make sure that people like Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey never go to prison ever again. After you jerk off to your fetish porn, of course. But in reality, you're probably just going to jerk off and watch Game of Thrones. Okay, who am I kidding? You're probably going to jerk off to Game of Thrones. Newsflash, Khaleesi isn't a real blonde. See those eyebrows? Cuffs definitely don't match the collar. Well, when you're done with your fat slap or your cookie rumbler, depending on your gender that supposedly doesn't exist, find out what you can do to help stop this madness. Otherwise, one day, it'll be too late. I honestly hope this is my last video until these two fellas are released. But unlike most y'all slackjaws, I'm going to see what I can do to donate my time to making sure this never happens again. Till then, bitches, deuces.